It's cold, it's dark, but at least there's plenty of football to keep us warm. Let's have a look to Game Week 21. Welcome back to the Draft FC podcast, a podcast website and YouTube channel dedicated to all things official draft FPL. My name is Mitch and I'm your host for another Game Week preview, going over waiver options, hidden gems and general Premier League chat ahead of Game Week 21. Game Week 20 saw a fairly predictable feast for those of us lucky enough to have Brentford assets. City got a timely boost with a big home win against West Ham. Liverpool started to show some cracks with a 2-2 draw against United, and Forest marched on again with a very comfortable 3-0 win over Wolves, or at least it was very comfortable in the end. Meanwhile, we've seen two slightly overdue managerial changes, with Dyche being replaced by David Moyes and Lopetegui being replaced by Graham Potter. Yes, it is 2025, in case you thought you'd tuned in to some Draft FC rerun from a few years ago. So yeah, we'll have to see how those teams shake out over the next couple of weeks. I'm regularly reminded by my colleagues and others that I need to be a little bit more YouTuber-y, and at the beginning ask people to hit the like button and subscribe if you are not already. So if that applies to you, if you've watched a few of these now and the algorithm seems to be recommending my face to you over and over again, then make sure you're subscribed so that you don't miss out on these episodes as the season continues. One thing that I've done this weekend is update our draft rankings, obviously something that's very big in the summer as we're all plotting draft days. Though actually probably something we underestimated at Draft FC is just how many mid-season drafts there are. So a lot of leagues out there seem to do a redraft halfway through around Game Week 19-20. So that's definitely something we need to be mindful of next season, and make sure as we're getting towards New Year around Game Week 18 that we make those rankings as up-to-date as possible. Others have rightly commented that the rankings can also just be helpful trying to suss out trades and waiver pickups as well, because if a player is ranked significantly higher, the chances are you are going to want to pull the trigger on that move. So yeah, I'm going to look to keep them updated at least every 3 or 4 game weeks as we head towards the end, and yeah, next season be a lot more hot on that after the summer has finished. Another reminder at the top is that we're going into a bit of an unusual waiver deadline this week due to a midweek game week. So the waivers will process tomorrow, Monday evening, 6 p.m. UK time, with the game week deadline 24 hours later on Tuesday evening, with the matches being played over Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday. There's then just the single day gap on Friday before a normal weekend of fixtures kicking off on Saturday. So it'll be a tight turnaround. I will aim to do the Game Week 22 preview on Thursday, but as I said, it will be a very tight turnaround. That will probably be a very quick episode, just skimming some of any of the key points. So I'm recording this episode on Sunday, the 12th of January, so any team news, injury developments or press conference info are up to date as of then. And of course, subject to change, the round 3 FA Cup fixtures are still ongoing. I've got the Arsenal United game on in the background. I've already had to update one of the slides at the half-time during that game due to an injury. So yeah, still chance for 1 or 2 other considerations to be made. Some of the players that I'll be discussing in this episode include Dango Ouattara, Danny Ings, Antonin Kinski, plus many more. So let's get straight into it. So let's kick things off as always with Waiver Watch. This data coming at you courtesy of our Draft FC dashboards, having a look at the players moving in and out ahead of Game Week 20 last weekend. So if we look at the players coming in, we've got Joel Linton, Savio, Kwanzaa, Nico Williams, Ryan Aït-Nouri, Elanga, Wilson, Harry Wilson that is, Hee-Chan Hwang, Howson, Bassi Castagna and Jose Sarr. Pretty solid set of additions there. Kwanzaa may be the only one that turned out to be a bit of a misstep, but otherwise some pretty good additions there. The players making way for them, we had Joe Gomez, Callum Hudson-Odoi, Lacroix, Udogi, Jorginho Rutter, Jadon Sancho, Gusto, Garnacho and Kunku, Estupinan, Doku and Martinez. So yeah, overall a fairly good list of players making way the other way there. Let's talk about some key injuries and suspensions. And there seems to be a growing number of key injuries at the moment. Obviously, last week we took a bit of a deep dive looking at the injuries to Bukayo Saka and Jarrod Bowen. If you own those players and you didn't see the last episode, ordinarily a lot of the stuff we talk about in the podcast goes out of date week to week, but they would be worth having a peek back at just for a little bit of a deep dive into the considerations in terms of how long they're going to be out for, how many points we might expect them to get, and whether mathematically it makes sense for you to hold them or drop them. Now, one or two people have pointed out something I kind of realised as I was doing it. The maths is an oversimplification. I do comment on that during last week's episode. I have started to do a deeper dive into some of the maths, but it actually requires doing a lot more work than I thought it would do. Essentially, some of the considerations that aren't taken into account are that, one, you've got a squad of 15 or 13 outfielders if you want to drill into it a bit more specifically. So just saying he's one of the 11 doesn't quite correlate with the missed opportunities. Then you've also got to work out what the potential opportunities are that you're missing off the waiver pile, which is a little bit more work to do. Opened up a few more avenues that I think are interesting and worth doing. So I'll see if I can complete that over the next few evenings. It may be part of an edition I do on Thursday for the Game Week 22 preview. Anyway, for this week, literally hot off the press, all of about 10 minutes ago at the time of recording this, Gabriel Jesus went down with what looked like quite a nasty looking injury in that United game. He went down 5 or 10 minutes before holding his knee, seemed to run it off, then chased after Bruno Fernandes, fouled him, and again went down clutching his knee, had to be stretchered off. It's difficult to speculate because the mechanism of injury was fairly innocuous. It was just one of those kind of, the first one was just a slightly awkward landing from a jump, and the second one was a bit of a trip and an overstretch. Obviously, worst case scenario here is an ACL injury. He's had problems, I believe, with that same knee before. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see. I doubt we're going to get any kind of firm news on that injury before the deadline tomorrow evening. If you do, and it's bad, then of course you drop him. I think just given how lacking we are generally for forward options, particularly in moderately side, even if, to be honest, even if you're in a league of 7 or 8, the forward options in the waivers are pretty dire. I think if there's no clear news, I would hold him tomorrow. Obviously, as I said, if there's news of a bad injury, then he has to go. John McGinn has picked up a hamstring injury. We expect him to miss a few weeks. The big news this week is the double blow for Bournemouth. So Evan Nielsen, another player with a fractured metatarsal, completing the hat-trick with Bowen and Pau Torres for Villa. He has apparently undergone surgery for his injury, which obviously Jarrod Bowen hasn't done. He's just in the boot. And to be honest, I haven't actually looked into the details of Pau Torres' injury because it doesn't really affect us as draft managers. But we know Evan Nielsen has had surgery. That tells us it was either a fairly displaced fracture or it was a slightly higher up fracture, potentially on his little toe on the outside of his foot, which means the recovery time is going to be slightly longer just because of that built-in healing required from the surgery. So I've provisionally penciled him for around game week 30 to return, but it could be slightly later than that even. And then completing the set with Enes Unal for Bournemouth with his second ACL injury, so he'll be out for the season and beyond. Really leaves Bournemouth lacking in that number 9 position. I would be very surprised if they didn't go out and look for some coverage there. Otherwise, it makes some of the other attackers that we're more familiar with potentially a bit more interesting, because someone's going to have to play up top, and it remains to be seen who that's going to be over the next few weeks. Rodrigo Muniz came off for Fulham with a back injury. Don't really have much detail on that. It could be nothing. He could be out for a little while. And then finally, Fulkrug injured again for West Ham with a hamstring injury. So similar to McGinn, expecting him around game 25, but we don't have firm details for either one of them. Let's have a look at some of the main picks then, starting with some defenders. The first one to mention is Ben White. Ownership still clinging in at 44%, with managers having held him for a number of months with his injury. He's back in training. Comments from Arteta, I believe, last week were that we could expect to see him in the on the pitch before the end of January. Arsenal's defence has had injury issues at times this season with both Timber and Calafiori, so I expect he will get some game time. He's certainly not a lock to hold down that right back spot like he would have been last season. Arguably, you could say Timber may be edging it for him now, so even if he does get back fit, don't be surprised to see him start a couple of games on the bench. But for those in larger leagues where he may still be in the waiver pile, if you had half an eye on him, I think now is the time to go for him. If you don't, then somebody else will. And then a couple of the Palace defenders, Chalobah and Lacroix, are the only ones realistically that you're going to be able to find in your waiver pile. Even they've got moderate ownership. The rest are all well above 80%. A trip to Leicester is a fairly decent chance of another clean sheet for what, on paper, still to me is one of the better defences in the league. Into midfield and the usual smattering of options. It feels like these kind of names are on a revolving door ever since game week 1. Starting off with a firm Draft FC favourite, or certainly a favourite of mine anyway, and that's Dango Ouattara. Ownership just 16% in 10-team leagues. If you have a look at his non-penalty expected goal involvements per 90, it is up at an absolutely massive 0.93 this season from just under 900 minutes. So not the biggest sample size, but certainly not the smallest either. Amongst players who have played a minimum of 800 minutes, the only players with a better per 90 average than that are Salah, Isak and Bukayo Saka. Now, he's underperforming those underlying stats. He's probably due 3 returns compared to what he's expected. But say, with the injuries to Evan Nilsson and Enes Unal, Bournemouth are going to have to get creative with their squad options. That is assuming, as I said a minute ago, that they don't go and bolster in the transfer market in this window, which I would expect them to do. Semenyo would probably be the most obvious candidate to play higher up, but he's done that before. We've seen that before. And for me, he's not half as effective as when he's coming in off the right-hand side. In the FA Cup game yesterday, we saw Dango play as the number 9, meaning he's now played left back, left wing and centre forward so far this season. Tavernier is nearing a return from his injury, and so we may see Semenyo, Dango and Tavernier as their front 3 in one of the most moneyball front 3s you'll see all season in the Premier League. I do hope Bournemouth go and get another forward because they've got a great chance of sneaking a European spot, and it would be a shame for their season to fizzle out due to those injuries. Previously, I've always felt Bournemouth have just been a bit too flimsy at the back to sustain any kind of run of performances, but their back line is really developing again into a solid top half defensive unit. The fixtures aren't great. We've got Chelsea away, Newcastle away, Forest at home, Liverpool at home in the next 4. But if they can come away from those 4 with, I would say, 4 points, so a win, a draw and a couple of defeats, they've got a very good chance of a strong top half finish as we go towards the end of this season. Next is a player whose ownership really skyrocketed at one point and is now starting to drift downwards again, and that is Dwight McNeil for Everton. He remains Everton's best attacker, and Moyes will want him back in the 11 ASAP. 3 goals and 5 assists from just around 1,100 minutes so far. Sounds like he's very close to a return, so it may not be this game week, but certainly the one after. I would expect him back in the squad. And I think if you are in any league larger than 8, with McNeil starting every week, he is someone that's too good to be in the waiver pile. Next is Leon Bailey. Finally converted some of those good opportunities he's been getting into a league goal last game week for his first of the season. It sounds like Jadon Philogene is being sold to Ipswich this window, so I'd probably expect Villa to add another forward player who can at least cover a wide position, even if they're not an out-and-out winger in this window. For now, though, Bailey should continue to start. The injury to McGinn just solidifies that even more. They've got a fairly good fixture on paper away at Everton. We're not sure how Everton are going to line up for that one with Moyes coming in. So yeah, as good an opportunity for Bailey to start to create a run of form. Next is Elanga, whose ownership is generally on the higher side for what I like to include on the pod because he's not going to be available for many of you. All I would say, and this could just be talking at those of you that already own him, is do not be put off by that Liverpool at home fixture this week. Forest will be bang up for that game, and if you've got any of their usual performers, not just Elanga, say even beyond that, a home game against Southampton waits in game week 22 at the weekend. So Elanga's got 5 attacking returns, consecutive attacking returns, 5 game weeks on the bounce now. Player really starting to live up to the promise that I felt his underlying numbers from last year could see him get this season. And yeah, someone I'd like to have in my draft team if I could. Savio is another one who's just starting to feel his way in. It seems like City have got a relatively settled 11 now. Certainly the 6 forward players in terms of their midfield 3 and attacking 3. I think we're seeing a familiar pattern now with Doku probably the one missing out, Grealish also missing out, Foden on the right, Savinho on the left, Haaland up top, Bernardo Silva, De Bruyne and Kovacic as the sitting 3. So a City player that you know is going to start, particularly a City attacker that's going to start, is always valuable, even with their poor run of form this season. A trip to Brentford will mean they will have opportunities, but you know, it's the sort of game, weirdly on paper, kind of fancy Brentford at home in that one. And finally, another player who's been a bit of a disappointment compared to my pre-season valuation of him is Paqueta for West Ham. But with Bowen, Antonio and now Füllkrug out, Paqueta is the other player that really needs to step up and is getting seemingly nowhere near as much airtime as teammate Mohamed Kudus, who we can also say has been a big disappointment this year. Both are sat on near identical points, both with 3 goals and 1 assist. Paqueta will be on penalties, Kudus won't be, and will have to get involved along that forward line even more than he has done so far. So for all of those comments that you see that this is going to be big for Kudus, Kudus can step up now, Kudus is going to be playing more centrally, I think a lot of those arguments can be applied to Paqueta too. So if you don't have Kudus, I mean Kudus' ownership is very high in a lot of average sized leagues, he's not going to be there in the waiver pile, but Paqueta certainly could be, and he could be that sort of sneaky way into an improving West Ham team. And say a player that, if you followed any of our pre-season content in the summer, was someone that I was high on about 5 months ago. So we'll see if he can play catch up with where I expected him to fall with the remaining half of the season. And one thing to say as well, especially for those watching on YouTube who can comment below, if there are any players, particularly those higher echelon players who you feel that I haven't mentioned that I should have done, players that people should really be looking at for this game week, then do comment them down below, and we can always spark some conversation in there too. Let's move on to the hidden gems. So these are players with generally less than 10% ownership in average size draft leagues, and we don't get it too often during the season, certainly not after the early weeks anyway, but we do have a brand new goalkeeper to talk about, and that is for my own club Spurs, who have signed Antonin Kinski. Not a huge money signing, but he was thrown straight into the starting 11 for the Carabao Cup semi-final against Liverpool in midweek for his debut, and looked really, really, really good, actually. Maybe it's just the contrast of having watched Fraser Forster for the last couple of months, who, it has to be said, has been nowhere near as much of a liability as I think most Spurs fans thought he would be. So it's no slight on Forster at all, but the way Kinski came in was much more akin to what we saw from Vicario in terms of his ability with his feet. To be honest, he didn't have a huge number of shots to save. The one thing that we can still say that Vicario has over him is shot stopping ability. That's not to say Kinski doesn't, but we just haven't seen him tested in that way yet. He also started in the FA Cup game today against Tamworth, which was a game in which the squad was generally quite off it, but was another clean sheet. Again, didn't really have a huge number of shots to do. A lot of the big chances were blocked by the defence. One thing it has shown, though, is that until Vicario is back at least, Kinski is going to be the Tottenham number one, absolutely no doubt. Probably for every game we play now. What happens when Vicario comes back fit? I don't know. I think that really depends on how well Kinski performs. I mean, if Vicario comes back in a few weeks and Kinski's been keeping clean sheets, making saves, playing out well from back, I don't think it's a lock that Vicario does go back into the starting 11. We've seen some images this week that Vicario is back in training, or at least he's starting to kick a ball around and be on the grass. So it's not a million weeks away before we see that return. But certainly if you are in a league of 11, 12 plus where starting goalkeepers come at a bit of a premium, then Kinski is definitely one to eye up. In defence, the only obvious one that stood out to me was Botman for Newcastle. just 8% in 10-team leagues. Newcastle have been okay defensively this season with 7 clean sheets. The return of Botman could see that clean sheet percentage rise even more. He looked like he hadn't really been away in the league game at Spurs last week and will certainly settle back into the regular back four. Their next fixtures are Wolves, Bournemouth, Southampton and Fulham for the next 4. So, pretty decent on paper. And I'm sure he will be out of hidden gem territory by next week. In midfield, Oscar Bob is worth just a slight mention. Ownership is just 1% at the moment, obviously being out with the fracture earlier on this season, and mainly just for larger leagues to be aware of. I think given the promise he showed in pre-season and in the early parts of the season before his injury, I think once he is back going, he will get minutes for sure. So that'll probably be a matter of weeks away. Not, if you're in an 8, 9, 10, 11, even 12-team league, it's not something you need to go and grab at the moment, but certainly in the larger leagues, one to think about. Next is Bergvall for Spurs. Didn't start the FA Cup fixture following his big display against Liverpool a few days ago. Very good chance, I think, of starting the North London derby. I think if you had to pick the best performing in-form midfield 3, he would be in there. The only thing really that could edge him out is whether Kulusevski plays in midfield or as a right winger. I think if Kulusevski is playing deeper in a midfield 3, Bergvall could miss out. But if Johnson is benched, which I expect he will be, then Kulusevski will play off the right, and I think Bergvall will start in midfield for the derby. So again, another one really for the larger leagues to have a look at. Next is Mavididi, who seems to be very much in favour by Ruud van Nistelrooy at Leicester, having started every league game, I think, since he took over. He scored against Villa in game week 20, and I think will continue to play. The Leicester defence is one of the last things I'm interested in, but they certainly can score goals. And it looks like he'll continue to start games up on the left next to Jamie Vardy for a while at least. And then the final one to mention here is Solly March, a player I don't think we're going to see immediately back in the starting lineup, but will no doubt start to come in off the bench. Earlier this season, I thought he'd find it incredibly difficult to get back in, as the squad almost seemed to just go on without him. They brought in Minter, they brought in Gruder, who are both direct replacements on the right wing. And we've also seen Jorginho Ritter play off the right at times a bit too. So I think with Brighton's patchier form in the last couple of months, it has to be said that none of those guys have really staked a claim to start regularly on the right-hand side. He scored a cracking goal off the bench late on in their FA Cup third round tie yesterday. And I know he is a very popular name amongst draft heads, especially if you were fortunate enough to have him the year before last, where he put up a massive 16 attacking returns that year. The bigger your league size, I think the more you're going to consider taking an early punt on him, because as soon as he does do something in the Premier League, his ownership will rocket. And then let's talk about the forwards. We kind of have to talk about the forwards because they're dropping like flies. So lots of us are going to have to be making forward waivers ahead of tomorrow, begrudgingly, with some pretty dire replacement options, but you need someone that's going to play. Ultimately, there's no point hanging on to some of these injured guys who are going to be out for a long time. So the first one, and probably your best option, is Danny Ings. I think if West Ham decide they do want a striker on the pitch, which to me doesn't seem too controversial, then new manager Potter will likely have to turn to Danny Ings. I've seen other lineups touted, but if West Ham were willing to try a style that revolved around Füllkrug up top, then Ings really isn't that much of a change there, though obviously I grant that setup had nothing to do with Potter, so he's got to kind of do the best he can with what he's got. Let's say with Bowen, Antonio and Füllkrug out, Somerville potentially got a little injury too, but even if he wasn't injured, has hardly impressed me this season. I think they have to go with Kudus and Paqueta either side of Danny Ings. That's how I'd line up this week. Lineups, though, are almost impossible to get 100% right with a new manager coming in, so Potter will have some preconceived ideas about who his favourites are in that squad, but considering the lack of forward options, so I think Danny Ings on just under 10% ownership in 10-team leagues will be a very popular must pick up this week, with the option that he could start a little run of games and actually score a goal, which is what we're looking for. And then a couple of real must options. Onuachu for Southampton is another one. If you just need a substitute striker that could get you 1 or 2 points off the bench, he is getting game time. I can't say much more than that. And then another one, is Beto for Aston Villa. DCL injured, Broja injured. Moyes may have Beto as the only fit senior centre forward. So does have the advantage over Onuachu that he has at least scored a Premier League goal this season back in Game Week 9. So if you were in a toss-up between those two, I'd go for the Everton man. And then the most hidden gem pick this week is an interesting one, actually. I could have flipped, well, it's a bit of a coin toss, really, on two players for the same club who both occupy or could occupy exactly the same spot in the starting 11. The one I've gone for is Emi Buendia. So the club is Aston Villa. The other player that we could have had on this slide, because there's also in most hidden gem territory in 16-team leagues, is Jacob Ramsey. I do like the thought of Buendia, though. He has been getting some substitute minutes quite reliably recently. So he's not a guaranteed starter by any means, and as it stands in my predicted lineups, which I have updated, I do have him penciled in to start. I've said it's a coin toss. It's probably 60%, 60-70% Ramsey, and the rest towards Buendia, but I just like the wildcard nature of Buendia coming in for his first league start in many months, and potentially getting on the score sheet. Obviously, McGinn's injured, Barkley's injured, and Emery seems to not really be fancying Kamara, Tielemans, and Onana as a three-man midfield, certainly not against lesser opposition, which I agree with. So it leaves an opening for another forward-thinking player to start. So, as I said, Buendia hasn't started a Premier League game this season. We've seen him off the bench in 3 of the last 4 league games, though. Obviously does have Premier League pedigree. In the 21-22 season, he got 10 goal involvements for that, and then 8 the season after. Of course, stalled by the ACL injury that he got at the start of last season. A grim reminder, really, of just how severe and how much of a setback an ACL injury can be for some players. Buendia in a Norwich shirt was an old draft favourite of Draft FC Kieran, and it would be nice to see him get a goal involvement again after sort of the last 18 months that he's had trying to get back to full fitness. He's still only 28, so hopefully plenty of years left for him on the pitch, and ownership in 16-team leagues is right down at 1%, so he's there if you fancy him. As I said, though, side note is that Jalen Ramsey is also in most hidden gem territory for most leagues too, and another consider. Again, I know Ramsey is a popular name amongst certain draft managers due to little purple patches he's had over the years. Never been one that's really called to me, to be perfectly honest, on the waivers, but I do know he's a popular name there, and so either one of those could be an interesting one. If we get any talk in any of the press conferences, if there are any press conferences tomorrow ahead of that game that gives us a lean one way or the other, then it's a player I'd be interested in going to, even in my main 19 draft league. Due to time and the turnaround, I'm not going to do trade talk this week, and I'm also not going to go through the predicted lineups, but they have been set. I updated them earlier today. So that is it for this episode. A reminder again, the waiver deadline is less than 24 hours away now, 6 p.m. UK time on Monday evening, with a game week deadline on Tuesday evening. Again, if you like what we do here at Draft FC and you're watching on the video, give us a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and comment below if there are any comments you've got about this video or any players that we've missed that you feel should be in the discussion for the upcoming game weeks. For those listening on the audio podcast, again, make sure you're following on whichever platform you listen to so they don't miss out on any of those future episodes as and when they drop. And due to the scheduling over the next week or two, the episodes will be coming thick and fast. For those of you that are big into your draft FPL, if you've somehow only found yourself here for the first time, we have a website dedicated to all things official draft FPL, draftfc.co.uk, where you can sign up for draft stats, metrics, and features you won't be able to find anywhere else that link in to your league, including all of the roster percentages that you hear me refer to in these videos, the waiver changes, predicted lineups with a lot more features bolted onto them, and also you'll be able to check out your global rank, which basically plots where your draft league is worldwide ahead of other similar sized draft leagues to see how competitive and just how good you and your league mates really are. So due to time, I will leave things there. As I said, the next episode will likely drop sometime on Thursday afternoon for another tight turnaround for a waiver deadline on Friday. Best of luck for your matchups ahead of this midweek game week, and until next time, stay sure.